Welcome back to the Lights Out podcast. Bedtime stories for boys and girls for when the lights go out. Good evening, boys and girls. Are you ready for bed? Are you all tucked up and ready for another Lights Out bedtime story? Good. Well, you're in for a treat tonight, because tonight's story is called King of the Sky by Nicola Daviea and illustrated by Laura Calvin. And this story, I'd like to read the little bit at the beginning of the book. Starting a new life in a new country, a young boy feels lost and alone until he meets an old man who keeps racing pigeons. Together they pin their dreams on a race across Europe and the special bird they hope can win it, the King of the Sky. A big shout out goes to all the awesome authors and the amazing listeners who are supporting the Lights Out Bedtime Stories mission of 1,000 ad-free stories for boys and girls around the world. That's right, we're trying to have 1,000 stories that boys and girls in less fortunate places can play every night. Ad-free. Who needs to listen to ads for Chevrolet or Coca-Cola or all that kind of stuff? No, it's about the stories. And so, without further ado, let's get to the stories. It's all about the stories, right? Nothing else, not here. It's just about the stories. And so, tonight's story is called King of the Sky by Nicola Daviea and illustrated by Laura Calvin. Once upon a time, it rained and rained and rained. Little houses huddled on the humpback hills. Chimneys smoked and metal towers clinked. The streets smelled of mutton soup and coal dust. And no one spoke my language. All of it told me, this is not where you belong. Just one thing reminded me of home, of sunlight, fountains and vanilla smell, of ice cream in my nonna's gelateria. It was Mr. Evans' pigeons in their loft behind my house, cooing as if they strutted in St. Peter's Square in Rome. Mr. Evans' face was crumpled, and he could hardly walk, but when his birds flew, they smiled like springtime. I stood beside him and watched as his pigeons soared above the chimneys and the towers, up to where the sky stretched all the way to Italy. A little lifetime working in a coal mine had taken Mr. Evans' breath away, so he spoke soft and slow enough for me to understand. I like to see them fly, he whispered, after so long underground. And every day I came to see the pigeons. I'm training them to race, Mr. Evans said, and this one's going to be a champion. He put a pigeon in my hands. I felt its small heart racing underneath my fingers, and the push and the power of its wings. Its head was whiter than a splash of milk, and its eyes blazed fire. Name him, and he's yours, the old man said. I didn't have to think. Re del cielo, I replied. King of the Sky. Mr. Evans showed me how to catch the birds and to slip them into a basket. Then we'd wheel the basket to the station in a barrow. How far today, then, Mr. Evans? The station master would ask. My friend would name a station up the line, 5 miles, 10 miles, 20 miles away. a little farther every time. They don't need a map like we do, Mr. Evans told me. They're born knowing how to find their way. All they need is a bit of practice. Back at the loft we'd wait, eating Mr. Evans' Welsh cakes and squinting up into the sky. "Look out now," Mr. Evans would say. "Keep those young eyes of yours well peeled." It never took them long. From places far away, places that they'd never been, the pigeons flew home straight and fast as arrows. But the pigeons with the milk-white head was always last. And still, Mr. Evans said he'd be a winner. "He's a hero," the old man wheezed, "like the pigeons in the war, carrying messages even when they were shot. Just you wait and see." Every day Mr. Evans grew a little weaker. By racing season he couldn't leave his bed. So I put the race ring on the pigeon's leg and took them to the station. I scoured the sky for their return and checked them in. Mr. Evans' bedroom wall was papered with their winnings, but not one of them for Re del Cielo, my king of the sky. He's got the wings for distance. Mr. Evans breathed. He's the race he's waited for. He handed me the entry form. King of the Sky would go to Rome by train, then race back 1,000 miles and more. I smoothed his feathers, looked into his eyes, and put him into the basket for the journey. A part of me was going with him. I wasn't sure he would come back. The race day dawned, and a storm blew in. Lightning, wind, and rain. I waited for 2 whole days and nights, but the pigeon with the milk-white head did not return. I sat beside my friend's bed and I told him that perhaps the sunlight and the fountains and the vanilla smell of ice cream from the 1,000 gelateria had made our pigeon want to stay. "No," said Mr. Evans, "that will only tell him this is not where you belong." The old man's eyes blazed fire. "Get out there, boy," he said, "and welcome him." The rain had stopped. I ran out into the loft and squinted up into the clouds. A speck, a blob, a bird, a pigeon with a milk-white head, a hero and a champion. 1,200 miles he'd flown from somewhere far away he'd never been, steered north and west, finding his direction from the sun and the force that guides a compass needle. Flown until he saw the shape of a humpbacked hills, the lines of little houses and the chimneys, heard the clanking of towers and smelled the soups and the coal dust. Flown down into the arms of the smiling, crying boy, the boy who knew at last that he was home. The end. Wow, what an amazing book about a pigeon called King of the Sky by Nicola Daviea. Here on the Lights Out podcast, bedtime stories for boys and girls everywhere. Good night.